Hi, my name's Chisholm, and in this video I'm going to talk you through how to change a drum head or a drum skin. Now, I'm going to be using this snare drum here, but hopefully the steps that I'm going to talk you through will be helpful whatever kind of drum skin you're changing, from any of the drums on the drum kit, that is. Whether that's another snare drum, the toms, or a bass drum, I use this same process pretty much for all of those drums to get started. Now, in this video I'm not going to be talking about tuning. All I'm talking about is literally taking the old head off, putting the new head on, and just getting that new head to a point where the tension is spread equally across the drum, which is a really good starting point for then tuning the drum. So, you will need some of these bits and bobs. Obviously, a drum key. I've got two in fact here, because sometimes when I'm changing heads, just to speed things up and also to spread the tension a bit more easily, sometimes it's easier to use two, but you only need one. Again, obviously, you're going to need your new drum skin. Now here, straight out of the box, I've got the head I'm going to be replacing this one with. This time I've gone for a Remo control sound. Again, doesn't matter really for the sake of this video why I've gone for that, but that's what I'm going to be replacing it with. I'll just pop that there, ready for later. And the last thing that I like to have nearby when I'm changing a drum head is I just grab a bit of kitchen roll. But a J-cloth, something, basically, because when you get rid of the old head, sometimes it's going to be a bit grimy under there, depending how long that head's been on. So it just pays off to be able to just give it a bit of a wipe while you've got the head off. So I just like to keep that nearby when I'm changing a head. Okay, that's all you should need. Drum key, obviously the drum skin you're replacing it with, and as I say, handy just to have a bit of cloth nearby. Now, you might be watching this video because you've never changed a drum skin before and you found yourself needing to, whether that's because you're a drummer yourself but you've not had to do this yet, whether it's because you're the parent of a younger drummer, a young student, whether you run a music department in a school and some of the kits at your school need the heads changing. There's loads of reasons. So obviously I hope this will help you in that case. But even if you've changed drum skins loads of times, like me, maybe still there might be some little tips and tricks that you pick up from this. I know that's how I've picked up some of these tricks myself. It's just seeing other people doing this and just observing the process that they follow. And as I say, over time I've just picked up a particular way that I like to do it that I've always found really helpful. So I wanted to share it with you. Anyway, let's get on with it. So first of all, I'm going to grab both drum keys and going from opposite sides of the drum, I'm going to take all the tension out of each of these hoops, each of the lugs. Good start. Now, as well as just speeding the process up, another reason I'm going from opposite sides is it's good to keep the tension on the drum spread evenly, rather than just doing all the tension rods on one side and then all the tension rods on the other side, because you could potentially warp the hoop if you do that. If you keep one side tight and the other side completely loose, it could warp and slightly bend the hoop, which obviously we want to avoid. So it's a good habit to just get into, whenever you're changing drum skins, to work in opposites, from one side of the drum to the other. Okay, now they're all pretty much undone now. Just make sure that none of them are sort of still stuck in there. I particularly like these drum keys that I've got here, because they've got these little knurled ends there. And as you can see, it makes it really quick and easy in this bit that I'm doing here. I can just grab those little knurled ends and just spin them around. Also, these ones are magnetic, so they're really handy. You can just leave them there and do that, and they're not just going to fall off. Right, I'm going to put those aside, and we're going to get rid of the hoop. So, just by hand now, I'm just finishing off these tension rods, just loosening them completely until they're dangling out of the lugs. There we go. Now, one of these little tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years, for years I didn't really know what to do with this. I found if I put it down somewhere, well obviously not on my keyboard, but on a table, if I put it down somewhere, the tension rods have a habit of popping out, and to be honest often they're quite greasy on the ends and they just make a mess, and for a long time I never really figured out what was the best thing to do with them. And then, one day, I figured, well, actually, if I just hang it up like that, that works really well. Whether it's on a door handle, whether it's on, well, anything you can find. As it happens, I've got a microphone stand just here, which I'm just going to leave that hanging there. If I do it carefully, hopefully none of those tension rods are going to fall out. There we go, and I can grab that a bit later on. So, here we go. Now that I've got the hoop out of the way, the drum skin literally just lifts off. There you go, there's my old drum head that I'll be replacing. As you see, it's got a bit of wear in the middle there. To be honest, it's still got plenty of life in it, but the main reason I'm changing skins right now isn't because this one's so particularly worn out. It's mainly because I wanted a different sort of drum skin for the sound that I'm going for with this drum. But again, as I say, I'm not going to get too bogged down with that in this video. So, old drum skin, I'm just going to put that aside. I'll put that there. Now I'm going to grab my kitchen roll. Tear off a piece of that. As I said, you might find, actually it's not too bad on this one right now, but sometimes if a drum skin hasn't been changed for quite a while, you might find it gets a bit grimy, even if it's just dust, chipped up bits of drumstick, because obviously when we're doing lots of rim shots and things, bits of the stick break off. Sometimes it can get pretty messy in here. Now, as well as just keeping it nice and clean, just because we're nice, tidy people who look after our drums, of course, as well as that, it's also good for the sake of the sound of the drum, because if when we put the new drum skin on, there's some bits of just sort of debris and just old bits of muck there that stop the new drum skin from sitting nice and flush with the bearing edge of the drum, that's going to potentially affect the sound of the drum. So just making sure that that's nice and clean when we do that will pay off. There we go, that's all there is to it. It's actually not too bad, this one. Now, I'm ready to grab my new drum skin. Here we go. And that, nice and easily, just sits over the top like that. Now, when you're changing heads, the absolute most important thing is that the logo from the drum skin lines up with the badge on the drum. That's absolutely essential. It will not work otherwise. Don't question me about that, just accept it. That has to be spot on. Of course I'm joking, but I'm kind of not joking as well. That has to be, for me, that's like a game changer. If I put my head on and then I sort of tighten everything up and I realise the badge isn't quite centred, that's tough. That probably tells you a little bit about the type of person I am as opposed to anything else. But there we go. So, we've got the new drum skin sat on the drum. At this point, obviously, I haven't secured it in any way, it's just sitting there. Now, really important, we've got to make sure this is centred nicely on the drum. It's possible that sometimes we might put it on it slightly at an angle from one side or the other, or perhaps it's just slightly shifted to one side or front to back. Okay, so we want this to be as centred as possible. So I always just give it a little bit of a sort of a wiggle around just to make sure that that is completely sat in the middle there. Okay, now I'm going to grab my hoop with all the tension rods still sat there nicely. So as I say, that's your first trick. And I'm just carefully going to sit that over the collar of the drum skin, and very, very loosely at first, just going to get the tension rods screwed back into the lugs, just with my fingers at this point. So as I say, I'm not going to put any real tension in the drum at this point. All I'm doing is just lining them up to make the next bit a bit easier. So again, now I've got that lined up, I'm just going to give the hoop and the drum skin a little bit more of a wiggle around to centre it, just to make sure that it's completely sat nice and evenly across the drum. I'm really happy with that. That looks good. Okay. So now, working opposites, I'm going to get to what we would call finger tight. Okay, so that's simply where, with my fingers, I've got to a point where there's no gap between the top of the tension rod and the hoop of the drum here, this washer here. Okay, so I'm just going around the drum, just getting finger tight. I'm not trying to really crank it down at this point, I'm literally just closing the gap. Sometimes people might do this with some sort of sometimes people will do this with like a drum key drill bit, and the same for taking the head off, but I must admit I've always preferred to do it by hand just so I'm in complete control of how much tension is in these. Okay, right, so now they're all finger tight. I can just go a little bit more on each one. There we go. You'll find that as you do one, then you can do another one a little bit more, just as the tension spreads across the drum. And as I say, I'm always working opposite sides, pretty much. Okay, now, for a lot of people, getting it finger tight is kind of where this process ends. But there was another trick that I picked up which was an absolute game changer a few years ago. And that's what I want to show you next. So rather than just going finger tight like this, and then starting to tune, This trick just involves getting the tension, rather than just the tension into the lugs, this involves getting the tension into the actual drum skin itself. Again, it's really easy, but it's a really valuable tip. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of press down. Now, ideally I'd have this on sort of a table or a bench, or if I don't have that, sometimes I'll even just put it in my lap. I've just got it in a snare stand now, so I'm not going to be pressing quite as hard as I perhaps would like to, but just for the sake of this video, being able to show you things as clearly as possible, I'm just going to press down on the hoop at each lug, and that will open up another gap. Okay, and again, I'm just going to go finger tight there just to close that gap. Done it this side, now I'm going to go to the opposite side. So I'm going to press down, create a little gap, finger tight. Again, working my way around the drum in opposites. There we go, that's why we don't do it in a snare stand. Do as I say, not as I do. That's old trick. Now you can hear there's a bit of a sort of cracking sound as I do that. That's just as the drum is sort of taking the shape, that's just as the drum head is taking the shape of the edge of the drum there. It's nothing to worry about. That's meant to happen, so don't panic. Okay, so I'm still just working from one side to the other, pressing down. I'm not pressing down with all my might. I'm just, as I say, just trying to close that gap. And it's worth going round a couple of times. Because as I say, once you've done one side, the other side might go a little bit more. So it's just worth doing it all around until you're satisfied that by pressing down and trying to get finger tight, you're not going to get any extra give. There we go. So this is now where I would start tuning. If I just give it a tap, you'll hear that there is actually a tone in the drum. There is, it's obviously very low, it's very loose still, this drum skin, but there is a tone there. It's sometimes just from going to that finger tight point, we can still end up with the actual drum skin itself completely flappy and with no tension in it. But just by doing this extra step that we've just gone through at the end there, as I say, it actually puts a bit more tension across the drum. Now, obviously there's a lot of work to do from there in terms of tuning, but do you know what? For some drums, I've actually found that just doing that can pretty much be enough. Some toms, certainly on the bass drum, a lot of the time, just doing this gets me to the point where sometimes I'm happy enough that that's where I want, that's how I want the drum to sound. One more thing that I will just talk you through. I usually do this as I'm tuning, so it's not quite so relevant, but I will just point out, as you start hitting the drum, once you start playing it, the drum skin itself can again just sort of get a little bit more settled in, and you might find that as you're hitting it, as you're playing the drum, that the tension just sort of again it's just like it's sort of still settling in a bit for the first however long. So I just like to at this point just press on the drum a bit, on the drum skin. Now some people really go to town on this. Some people you'll see like standing on their drums and like literally putting all their weight on it. I must admit I've never quite done that, but I do just get it settled a little bit more just by pressing on it. It's almost like giving it CPR. And then I might just go around again just to check that that hasn't loosened off any of these lugs, any of these tension rods. Yeah, there was just a tiny little bit in each one. So again, doing that, just make sure that we're as even as possible. Great! So as I say, that is now at a point where I would start tuning it. I'm not going to get into that now, but hopefully that's got to a point where there's pretty even tension all around the drum. There's a bit of tension in it. We've obviously gone from the old head to the new head, nice and easy. As you see, it doesn't take much time. Obviously takes even less time when you're chatting about it, as I've been here today. But I hope that that has been helpful for you. There's plenty of other videos all about tuning drums, so I'm not going to get into that now, as I say, but I hope that gives you a good start, and even if you've done this plenty of times before, that maybe you might have picked up a couple of useful tips from that, just through the way that I've always done it. I hope that's helpful, and I will look forward to catching you again in another video. Take care and all the best.